Welcome to Impact Church. It is awesome to have you with us today. If you're new here, we want to encourage you just to click on that little new here option on the red ribbon of our homepage at impactkingston.com. As well, if you want to be tracking along with what's going on at the church, feel free to just click on the Impact News sign there and fill out that little form. We'd love to be able to add you to our weekly email list that goes out, or email updates that go out. And as well, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Impact Church-Kingston. There's a lot of good information there, a lot of good material. We want to just keep you fed and keep you growing and keep you connected with all that's going on at church. In light of that, we have a couple things I just want to make mention of. First and foremost, tomorrow night, Impact Prayer, 7 p.m. If you're interested in joining in, we are doing it via Zoom. So just email prayer@impactkingston.com and they'll send you the link. Next, we have a very special event coming up on Sunday, February the 7th at 7 o'clock called A Newcomer's Connection. It is simply that. We want to connect with our newcomers. Sandra and I are going to be on there, being able to share a little bit more about our church. We're going to share a little bit more about our church DNA, about our discipleship process, which we see through our growth track, as well as our leadership structure. And at the same time, one of the parts that we love is to do a Q&A so that we can answer any questions that you may have about Impact Church. If you are new or newish in the last year, we want to encourage you to come. It's going to be just a great time of learning, growing, connecting, and finding out what Impact is all about. Last but not least, I want to just remind you of a very special parenting small group that's coming up starting Sunday, February the 14th at 8 p.m. via Zoom, with an incredible organization called biblicalparenting.org. That's their website as well. Dr. Scott Turansky and Joanne Miller are just phenomenal leaders in this realm, and we are spoiled as a church to be able to have them with us. So if you're interested in joining that small group, just email me, Cameron@impactkingston.com. And now it's time for our next installment of our Be Bold message series.
Well, good morning, church. And wow, that sermon bumper totally gets me off my chair. Except I'm not on a chair, I'm standing. But wait, I'm also on my chair sitting, watching me stand. That's pretty crazy. I've always wanted to be in two places at once, and now I am. Wow. Thank you, Stuart. That is awesome. Anyhow, back to the sermon bumper. I just want to run you through this incredibly powerful thought that it's actually declaring right in those captions of the bumper. It says, one moment, one conversation, one invitation, one action, one step, one bold move could make all the difference. What if you could be that difference in someone's life? What would you be willing to do? Well, welcome to week 3 of our Be Bold sermon series. And I just want to warn you right now that I may get a little bit inspired and a little bit passionate, because I really do believe that this is a timely series for us as a church to remember that we have been called to live sent, to be bold, and to reach the world around us for Christ. So back to the sermon bumper and what it's actually saying. It's saying, what if you could be that difference in someone's life? In other words, what would you be willing to say or do. See, in the natural, 2021 has had a pretty interesting start so far. It's been pretty discouraging and frustrating. And the more I talk to people, I have this overall sense of just frustration. It's been restricting, it's been stressful, it's been overwhelming, it's been a little depressing, actually. It's been frightening for some. And in the natural, that's how a lot of people are feeling about 2021 so far. And that's not good because we're not even through the first month yet. But whoa, think about that. Let's stop and think about how people are feeling. What an opportunity we have right now because of that to actually share the hope of Jesus in these times. See, normally when life is just normal and convenient for people, they make very little room to ask the big questions. They often don't even feel like they need anything outside of their norm and outside of their normal kind of more happy, even life. But now, because the storm is raging and frustration levels are high and stress levels are high, it actually awakens in people a sense for a need for help. See, the reality is this, that when darkness gets darker, the light can shine even brighter. And that is awesome. That's where we as the church of the living God can step in and shine the light on these bleak circumstances and say that there is an answer, that there's something that we can do. So, Let's think about this. What if you could be the lighthouse in someone's storm? What if you could make a difference in someone's life? What if you could bring a word in season to those who are weary? What if you could tell them that there's a different perspective, a different way to live, a different source to look to, that there's an anchor that can keep them steady in the midst of this storm? Well, I want to declare that according to the spiritual, 2021 is a great year. 2021 is a year of harvest. 2021 is a year of focus. If we look at eternal things, not natural things, I believe that 2021 is a year of fruitfulness, a year of open doors, a year of increase, and not just increasing blessings in our lives, but I believe that this is a year of harvest, of an increase in a spiritual harvest of people coming to know Jesus Christ. I believe that 2021 is a year to be bold, that it's a year to pray bold prayers backed up by bold faith. I believe that this is a year to care with the compassion of Jesus Christ, that this is a year that we can share Jesus with someone who needs a divine interruption to their mundane life or their stressful life or their depressed life. This is the year, church, to tell them that Jesus doesn't just have answers for them, but that Jesus is the answer. I believe in the spiritual that even though in the natural we've been off to a very difficult start of this year, I believe that this is the season, this is the time for us to believe for great things. And I want to say, don't be discouraged if you have not seen fruit yet from your prayers, if you haven't seen fruit yet from your efforts, because I believe that God is bringing us into a new season of harvest. And I want to read to you Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. It says this, from the Passion Translation, it says this, "And don't allow yourselves to be weary or disheartened in planting good seeds, for the season of reaping the wonderful harvest you've planted is coming." Church, this is the season. Don't be discouraged. Don't be weary. Harvest time is coming. I believe it's already here. So in the last couple of weeks of our Be Bold series, Scott has talked about the power of one and about how we can live the mystery of Christ and show the mystery of Christ and present God to others by literally living our lives in a way of just being with Jesus, showing what that's like to those around us. But it really is an amazing thought that the living God, the maker of heaven and earth, has chosen me and you to be his ambassadors on earth, to represent his mission and his heart to the world. See, we can reveal the mystery of Christ to the world around us through our lives, and we can represent the hope of the world to a world that has lost all hope, to a world that is seeking something more. And Scott touched on that when he said, there's people that are seeking something more, something outside of the normal, the mundane. And I know some of you have heard this story before, but there was something that happened to me years ago that profoundly affected me. I was on this bus years and years ago. I started talking to this guy, and long story how we got there, but we started talking about kind of nothing. And it ended up being this really deep, big conversation about eternal things, about supernatural things. And he started telling me how he had been seeking everywhere for something that was bigger than just what he saw and what he knew, bigger than himself. And so he was into all sorts of bad stuff and had been seeking in some places that were pretty crazy, actually. But then I listened to him. I heard his heart. I heard how he was seeking. And so I let him share his story. But then I asked, hey, can I share my story? And I started telling him about a God who is real, about a God who is alive, about a God who is supernatural, about a God who knows him, about a God who loves him, and about a God who does miracles today, who is alive and well today. And we had this incredible conversation about Jesus, about the gospel, about how God is not just religion and form and duty, but God is a living God that wants a relationship with each and every one of us. And it was this amazing conversation, but I will never forget what happened when we parted after that conversation. He kind of stopped for a moment. He thanked me for sharing my heart. I thanked him for sharing his, but then he looked me right square in the eye. And all of a sudden his eyes just filled up with not tears, but with deep sorrow. And he looked at me and he said, if this is true, if what you are telling me is really real, if there is a God who is real, if his power is still available today, then why has nobody told me about him before? And I was just so struck with compassion for this man. He would have been maybe in his mid-30s or so. And I thought, here is this man, and he has lived his whole life up until that point, and not one person had told him yet that Jesus is real and that he wants to be part of his life. And I don't know what happened to the man. We didn't stay in touch after that point. But I'll say this. The way he looked at me and sincerely asked, why didn't someone tell me until now, has etched itself into me. And I always remember that when I look at people around me, and I think, how many people are there out there that are just waiting for someone to share that there is someone who loves them, who wants relationship with them. See, my heart broke for that man that night. But I want to say, church, today, think about your neighbors, think about your coworkers or your fellow students or the people that you have around you. What if they're just actually waiting to ask the question? What if they're just waiting to hear someone say, there's something more, there's something else? See, I believe, church, this is why it's so important that we live sent every day of our lives, that we can be bold in sharing about the message of Jesus Christ. See, a lockdown or even a stay-at-home order cannot restrict what God has put you on this earth to do. I encourage you, church, to ask God for opportunities, to pray for someone, to care for someone, and to share with someone, because God will not disappoint. If you ask him for an opportunity, he will give it to you. And don't just ask for an opportunity. Ask him to give you the boldness to take it when it's given to you. And so now, more than ever in history, I believe we have endless tools to help us do this. Whether you need to utilize social media, or whether you need to pick up the phone and make a phone call, or whatever you need to do, I believe that we have so many tools right at our fingertips, literally, to reach people. And you may not, in this lockdown, in this stay-at-home order, be able to actually knock on people's doors right now, but you can knock on the heart, on the door of their heart right now and say, hey, listen, do you want to have a conversation? Do you want to talk? Just like Scott said, focus in even on the one and build relationships so that when they're ready to talk, they know who to turn to. Think about this. When Jesus walked the earth, he hung out primarily with 12 people. And those 12 disciples were scared, imperfect, some of them completely uneducated, and they simply spent time with Jesus. They saw what he did. His compassion for people rubbed off on them, and then they were filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, and they literally started a movement from 12 people that went down to 11 and then back up to 12. They started a movement that swept across first the then known world and then across the entire globe. From 12 people, it has now affected millions of people. And now we get to be the continuation of that, just like we talked about in the 829 series that we are living on the book of Acts. But we live in times where Christianity is no longer socially accepted, and basic Christian viewpoints have so much pushback in this moment that it's hard to be bold sometimes. It's hard to step out because you don't know who's going to say what and who's going to think what, or if you're going to be canceled out of someone's life. So a lot of people are drawing back because they're afraid, because there's so much pushback. But think about this. It's not really that different from what the disciples faced. They had their own versions of lockdowns for different reasons, some of them behind bars. But they faced persecution. They were oppressed. They were shaken. They had all sorts of things come against them. But somehow, the more pressed they were, the more bold they got, because they knew that the message of Jesus Christ is life-changing. See, there's something in them that caused them to stand when they were told to sit, to be bold when they were told, or where they had every excuse to tremble in fear, to share when they were told not to speak about the name of Jesus. And even when they were forbidden to do so, they kept doing it. My friends, I believe that their boldness didn't come because they were these incredibly courageous men and women. I believe that it had to do with their motivation. I believe that they had seen the heart of Jesus on display, and they were moved with compassion, just like him. Church, I believe many Christians struggle today with this thought of being bold and sharing Jesus because they can't find the right motivation to do so. I believe that being bold about your faith, or praying and caring and sharing for someone like we're talking about, is not just something we should do out of obligation or because it's the right thing to do, although those are good motivations. They're not bad. But remember that our mission is to share Jesus. See, being bold and living sent is not just campaigns or initiatives that we're trying to encourage you to do so that you can get a badge for being a good Christian, or get a tap on your shoulder. And it's not about toughing up and being extra brave. And it's not just about the practicals or the how-tos. And if you want some of those, go and listen to our gospel series from the master classes in the fall if you want some practicals. But today, I'm actually just hoping to stir in you a heart of compassion, the same heart that Jesus came for, the same heart that he displayed while he was here on earth. And so I want you today, church, if anything, just to walk away with a passion to see a broken humanity come to know Jesus Christ. See, Jesus in some ways ran the first ever rescue mission when he came to rescue people out of the misery of not knowing God and being separated from him for eternity. And some people may have heard me share this story. I shared it a couple of years ago, but when I heard it first, about 5 years ago, it really struck me. And I learned a little bit more about this idea of yacht clubs. And I don't know if you know anything about yacht clubs, and sorry for those of you who have heard this before, but it's so appropriate to this theme. But yacht clubs were originally formed because these yachts were big boats that were meant to be out in the deep. They would travel out in the deep so that they could help people that were in distress and rescue them and bring them back to shore. But over the years, those big yachts, those big boats that were meant to be and designed to be out in the deep sea, nowadays, if you look at yachts, for the most part, they're docked at bay because of the culture of who they were, what they were supposed to be has been lost over the years. And now yacht clubs actually cater to the people on the boat. They no longer cater to the people in the waves. They cater to the people on their boats. They entertain them and they eat some fancy dinner and they have some pleasant conversations, but they've actually lost their purpose because they were never meant to be docked up. They were meant to be out in the deep seas, rescuing people that were in the waves. And today, church, I just want to urge you, don't forget your mission. Don't forget who you are. Church was never about being docked up and having dinner parties and having pleasant conversation. Church was always about being a mission, a rescue mission, about being out in the waves and drawing people out of those waves. Church, I am urging you in this season, don't sit back and become comfortable. If 2020 did anything for us as a church, I think it was good that it pushed us out of our buildings and out of our comfort zones. And it reminded us of our mission. It reminded us of why we are here. We are a rescue mission, reaching people that are far from God, drowning in the waves. And can I tell you, church, when you get in there in the deep and you throw out a life-saving device, you may actually get a little wet in the process. The process isn't always clean and dry. Sometimes we have to sacrifice so that we can reach those people that are drowning. See, church, we cannot be indifferent. We cannot forget our mission. We cannot be silent. We need the compassion of Jesus Christ to grip our hearts, the compassion for people's eternity. And we cannot forget that God has called you and me on this mission to be key players to help those around us. I want to share something that happened to us, actually happened to our boys in 2020. On Canada Day, and I may get a little bit emotional because this was a pretty significant moment. But since everything was shut down in Kingston, all the normal Canada Day festivities were shut down, I decided to just take the kids downtown and take them walking by the water. And so Josiah and Caleb, our two boys, went jumping out on the big rocks down by Battery Park, for those of you who know where that is. And I have their permission to share this story, but they were just the two of them kind of going out further and further on these rocks and into this place downtown by the water. And all of a sudden, Caleb came running back, and I could tell that he was really, really upset about something. And so he came running to me, and I was just kind of further back with our girls. And he said to me, "Mom, I got to talk to you. I got to talk to you in private." And I thought, "Okay, what's going on?" And he said, "Mom, we found something in the water." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, what is it, son?" He goes, can we come out of earshot from the girls for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Mom, I think we found someone." And I was just absolutely in shock. Like, I think you're seeing things, son." And he goes, "No, Mom, we found someone." And so I started making my way out. Josiah had stayed out by where this incident had happened. And I don't know if you followed the news last Canada Day in Kingston, but this was unfortunately a true story, and it was on the news. But as I came closer and closer, I started to realize he's right. There's someone in that water, someone that had unfortunately passed and drowned. And so as I came closer and closer to Josiah, who was still out there, it was kind of windy and wavy, and I kept calling to him, "Son, are you okay? Son, talk to me." And I could hear him kind of faintly saying something. And as I came closer and closer, I could hear him, and I thought he was calling for me, but he wasn't. As I came closer and closer to Josiah, I could hear him, and he was crying out to God. He was praying from his very gut, and he was calling on Jesus and praying not for this man anymore, because unfortunately it was too late for this man, but he was calling out to God. There was such a compassion in Josiah that day as he was just calling out, and he was crying out to Jesus, and he was saying, "God, please speak to this family, God," as they find out this tragedy that has happened to this man. It was an international student, a young person that unfortunately had taken his life, and he had been missing for a few days. And so when they found him, Josiah instantly knew that his parents are going to find out and his friends are going to find out. So from the very gut of his being, Josiah was just crying out to Jesus and asking him to be there in that moment, to asking and petitioning the Lord to speak to them and to help them deal with this tragedy. And I saw something in my son that day that I have barely ever seen ever before. And I saw the compassion of Jesus Christ for a human soul. And as I came closer, Josiah was saying, "Mom, I don't know where he is. I don't know where he's going to spend eternity. I don't know if he was okay. I don't know if it was too late for him. But I can tell you right now, church, that it did something in my son. It stirred something in our son, in Josiah that day, and in Caleb. But there was a compassion for a human soul that I have never seen like that before. And so, church, why am I sharing this story? I'm sharing this story because I want to tell you that this is real. That there are people that are on the brink of despair, and we don't know when we're going to have an opportunity to speak to someone. We are praying and believing that this man knew Christ, that he is with him. We don't know. We don't know his family, but I know Josiah has been praying ever since for his family, that they would come to know Christ, that this incident would shake them to seek him out if they didn't already know him. And I want to tell you, church, that this is real. It happened here in Kingston in 2020. There's people around us that need to hear the message about Jesus. And we don't know what people's circumstances are like. And the reality is this, church, that people aren't always in physical waves. People aren't always going to be at the brink of ending their life. And people aren't always in visible despair, but I believe with all my heart that in this time, in this season, there's a storm raging all around us. It's awakening people's need for something more. I pray today that you would not just be aware of the heart of Jesus for people, but that you would tap into the passion and the compassion of Christ for humanity, that you would see the people the way Jesus sees them, and that you would be bold and live sent for the rest of your earthly life. And I was thinking about this, church. Most people are passionate about something. Think about it. If you've discovered something that works great for you, say if it's a product or a piece of technology, you want to share it with others because, first of all, you know what it does to you. You know how that has worked for you or satisfied you. But if you're really genuine about it, you want to tell others about it because you want it to work that well for them. And we know that some people are out there to sell a product because of profit, and so they're not genuine. They're in it for something else, and we all know that. But when you're genuinely excited about something in your life, you do want to genuinely share it with others. And I believe that when we have an encounter with Jesus and experience his love, his forgiveness, and his compassion in our own lives, it becomes a natural motivation to want to tell others about how Jesus has satisfied your life and how knowing him will make a difference in someone else's life. I don't know about you, but Jesus is the best thing that has ever happened to me. He is my rock. He's my refuge. He's my joy. He's my anchor in the storm. He's my healer. He's my defender. He's my comfort. He's my helper. And he's the one who satisfies my soul. There's nothing like knowing Jesus, and I can't help but be passionate in wanting others to know that same thing. Paul said it this way, that he forsakes all things and count them all as rubbish. And in Philippians 3:10, he says this, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. Church, this is what it's about. It's about sharing him. See, it's my passion to know him and to make him known. And it's about doing that through seeing what Jesus sees in another human, to know that they're extravagantly loved by him. And it's about learning not to lean on your own understanding and sharing that, but about living completely surrendered to Christ, letting him fill you and letting his compassion lead you to those that are in need. And if I've seen anything in the last number of months, is that a lot of people are fueled by passion, but for the wrong things or have the wrong motivation. If I've seen anything in the news, I've seen that people are fueled by anger, by frustration, or even hatred. And the world around us is filled by that, as we've seen by all the protests and angers and opinions and the cancel culture and all that kind of stuff. But, we just had the Martin Luther King Jr. Day this past week, and there's a famous quote by him that is so appropriate. It says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." Church, we have a mission to share the love of Christ through the compassion of Christ. See, there is a place for righteous anger when we see the craziness in the world around us and standing up for what is right and coming against sin and all that. But I believe that the best way to reach the heart of a fellow human is to show the same compassion that Jesus would. Lamentations 3:22 says, "Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not." See, the Lord's compassions are great. His compassion is never ending. Psalm 103:8 says, "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love." It's the complete opposite of what we're seeing in the world right now that is so filled with anger sometimes, frustration and hatred. See, the Lord is compassionate and gracious. That's the heart that we need to display to the world around us. So I just want to show you what the word compassion actually means. In English, it's actually a compound word. It comes from the word com, C-O-M, which is a prefix, which means together or in association with or in intensive force with something, being the second half of the word passion. So think about that. Compassion is in association and intensively by force together with passion. That's an incredibly strong emotion. In the Bible, the word compassion in the Greek, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because it's like whatever. And there, I tried, and I said I wouldn't. But it's this word, and it's the only New Testament word used for this. And it means to feel a yearning or sympathy, to be moved as to one's bowels, hence to be moved with compassion, because the bowels were thought to be the seat of love and pity. So in other words, compassion is something that moves us. Compassion is something that stirs us. And today, church, I hope that Jesus Christ can stir some compassion and passion for souls, for people that are around you. But to truly understand the heart of Jesus for another human being, I believe that we need to understand two simple things. We need to understand, first of all, our purpose, which is then also that person's purpose, which fundamentally is to be in relationship with God. That is why Jesus came, because we were separated from God, not just on earth, but for eternity. So he came to reconcile man to God. I believe with all my heart that our primary first purpose on earth is to know him, to have relationship with him. And you've heard me say this before, but when we have relationship with him, we develop his character in our lives. His character then gives us place to function for him, to do things for him, which leads to a natural reproduction. But church, it starts with this one thing, to know our purpose, which is to know him. And like Paul said, the power of his resurrection. And the second thing we need to understand to have true compassion for our fellow human beings is to understand eternity. See, Jesus understood the value of a human soul. This is why he came. He knew that our lives on earth here were so brief, that they're so fleeting in comparison to eternity, that he was willing to lay down his own life so that we could have not just an abundant, wonderful life with him here and now on earth, but for eternity be reunited with our Maker. Someone explained eternity like this to me years ago, and it's always stuck with me. They said, if you take every grain of sand from every shore on the entire face of the planet and you line them up grain by grain, side by side, I don't know how many times that would circle the earth. But he said, our lives are like one grain of sand here on earth, and the rest is eternity. I know Scott said we can't comprehend eternity, and I agree with that. But think about it. Sometimes we focus so much on our pleasure, on our what we want to do here and now on earth, but we forget that it really is about living sent so that we can have relationship with Jesus here and now, and we can bring as many people with us into heaven to spend eternity with him. And that is the rescue mission that we're on, church. Let's not forget that eternity is long, and what we do here and now matters potentially for someone else's eternity as well. This is what motivated Jesus to come in the first place. He wanted to reunite humanity with their Creator. Luke 19:10 says that he came to seek and to save that which was lost. That was his mission. That is our mission. But in order to see a person through the eyes of compassion, we first need to understand that every person will be spending eternity somewhere, and how they respond to Jesus will answer the question of where that is. See, God wants us to live an abundant life, like John 10:10 says, here and now in relationship with him, but also to live with the knowledge that we're going to have a whole eternity to spend with him. And I don't know about you, church, it's worth going after the one, just like Jesus did, just like we've heard in this series, that it matters. It matters to build relationships with someone. It matters to be ready to speak to someone. It matters for us that we can pray for someone, that we can care for someone, that we can share with someone, because you don't know what role you're playing in bringing that person closer to Christ. And church, we cannot, in this day and age, even though Christianity is having so much pushback, we cannot be afraid to speak about the message of Jesus Christ. Romans 10:14 says, how then can they call on the one whom they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they haven't heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? Church, this is why it's so important that our hearts are in the right place, that we're not sharing out of guilt, that we're not sharing with others out of some kind of crazy sense of obligation, but that we're filled with compassion, knowing that they will not know unless someone shares with them. Romans 1:16, one of my favorite verses, says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And church, this is a day and age where we need to remind ourselves that we cannot be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it goes on to say, for it is the power of God to salvation for all who believes. See, the gospel transforms lives. The gospel brings forgiveness. It mends broken hearts. It fills the void. It heals people. It helps people belong. And it has the power to break addiction. It brings freedom to the captives. That's why we cannot be ashamed in today's day and age to share the message, the good news of Jesus Christ, because it has the power to change lives. Jesus himself in Luke chapter 4 declared that this was his first sermon, and said, "This is why I came, to share this good news." And now we get to do the same. And as I wrap up today, I just want to share with you how we can see the compassion of Christ lived out in his life. And I just want to actually run you through a few instances from his life. And I hope to stir in you a desire to live like him and to love like him, to be bold, to step out and to live sent every day of your life. But when we look at the life of Jesus, I actually see that throughout his life, the compassion of God that it talks about in the Old Testament was lived out in the very person of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. See, Jesus' compassion motivated him to minister to people, body, soul, and spirit. And he actually ministered to all three because sometimes he simply recognized that there were human needs that needed to be met. And he was compassionately moved to help them. Other times, he both fed people, he healed people, both emotionally and physically. And throughout his life, we can see this incredible compassion as he is the display of the Father heart of God on earth. So we see it. I want to read to you from Matthew 9, verse 35 and 36, because we see the same compassion come through all the time when he was ministering to the crowds. And they've even titled this passage, "The Compassion of Christ." And it says this: "Then Jesus went about the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd." See, it was the compassion in his heart to make him get up early in the morning and spend time with his Father so that he could have the spiritual fuel that he needed to minister to hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. It was that same compassion that drove him to notice the man in the tree or the beggar on the road. It was compassion that overwhelmed him in Christ. In the life of Christ, we see it all the way through. In church, we cannot function outside of living in the vine, in Jesus, driven by the same compassion for our fellow humans. We see it when he ministered healing to people. We see it when he fed the hungry crowds. We see that it was because of compassion that he taught on different things like forgiveness in Matthew chapter 18, in the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, or when he talked about the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. See, if you look at all those stories and read them, this word compassion comes over and over again because it was what motivated him to keep going and to keep sharing, even though he was rejected, even though not everyone wanted to hear what he had to say, but he kept sharing the message of compassion with everybody that would listen, because it was what motivated him. In church, it is what needs to be motivating us. See, compassion was in his response to the blind men sitting on that road outside of Jericho. Compassion is what drove him not just to cleanse the leper, but to touch the untouchable. The lepers of the day were the social outcasts. They had to socially distance, not just for a few months, not just for a year, but for their entire lives. They had to cry out, "Unclean, unclean." It had probably been years since they had human touch, and Jesus could have spoken a word and healed them, but his compassion knew that they did not just need physical healing. They did not just need their limbs to be fixed. They needed their hearts to be mended. And so Jesus, out of the compassion in his heart, actually put his hands on the lepers and touched them and held them and healed them, body, soul, and spirit. It was the compassion of God that led him to heal that demon-possessed man in Matthew chapter 5 and bring freedom to him. And look what happened in Mark 5, verse 19 and 20. After he has set this man free from his torment, he says this to him. He says, "Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had compassion on you." And he, the man, departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis. That literally, that word is not a place. It actually means 10 cities. He started declaring in 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. Think about this, church. One man was touched by the compassion of Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, go and tell your friends. But you know what, guys? He did not stop with telling his friends or just his own hometown. It said that he proclaimed it to 10 cities, because when the compassion of Christ touches your own heart, there's something in you that desperately wants to share it with everybody that will listen. And because he had been touched by the compassion of Jesus, people, it says right in scriptures, in 10 cities got to hear about his message. And it said they all marveled. It was the compassion of Christ that drove him and took him to heal that tormented boy with the seizures in Mark chapter 9. It was the compassion of Christ that stopped a funeral procession when he saw a woman, a widow that had lost her son. And he upset everyone of the day and stopped this procession. And he said, it says in the scriptures in Luke chapter 7 that he had compassion on her. And he said, don't weep. And he actually brought his son back to life because of that same compassion. It was the compassion of Jesus that made him not only notice, but invite a socially rejected tax collector named Matthew into his group of 12. It was the compassion of Christ that made him stop outside of Jerusalem when he was about to enter in Luke chapter 19. And it says that Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem because he could see how they were scattered and how they were lost. And he's weeping over the city because of his compassion. In Hebrews chapter 4, the writer declares that Jesus is our compassionate high priest because he has been a human. He has lived the life that we've lived, and he is now more qualified than anyone else to be our high priest because he has compassion for humanity, but he also has compassion for you and for what you go through. And ultimately, it was the compassion of Jesus when he hung on the cross and when he had suffered and when he had been beaten and tortured by people, the very people that he had been speaking to and healing and helping. They were now his tormentors. And as he's hanging on that cross, it is the ultimate show of the compassion of the Father heart of God that he displays when in his dying breath, he could have said, ha, I got you. Ha, I told you I was the Son of God and you were all wrong and I was right all along. But instead of rubbing it in their faces, he's hanging on that cross. And when he has turned to his Father and surrendered to him in his last dying breath, he cries out and he says, Father, do not charge them for this sin because they do not know what they're doing. And it's the compassion of Christ bleeding out for his enemies and his tormentors at this point. Church, there's something very special about the compassion of Christ. And we actually see the same thing kick into the disciples, to the apostles, even the early deacons. We see it in Stephen as he is being stoned because of his faith. The very same thing comes out of him at the very end as they're literally stoning him. He is standing there. It says he fell down, he knelt down, and with his last breath, he cries out, God, don't hold this against them, because even in his dying breath, Stephen knew that what they needed was to be reunited with their Savior. They needed to see that Jesus was the one that could reconcile and the only one that could reconcile them. Church, it is time to have the courage to ask God to show you how he feels for humanity. There's a song that came out years ago, and in the bridge it says, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. That is what we need, church. And I know this is a little bit heavy, but I want you to hear that, church, it's time. It's time for us to feel the compassion of Jesus Christ for humanity, because that's why he came. That's why he passed the baton. And sometimes compassion hurts. Sometimes it is deep. We saw that in Josiah that day, when he had such compassion for this fellow human being who had lost his life. And Josiah sat and he wept that whole night, not because he was traumatized, not because of what he had seen, but he sat on our laps. And with Cameron and I, we just held him and prayed over him as he said, it hurts to feel what God is feeling for a human being in church. It is time for us to allow the compassion of God to grip our hearts. This is not a time to sit back and wait for things to return to normal. This is a time to seize the moment, to walk through the open doors that are here, because people are struggling. And this is an incredible opportunity, church, to live sent, to be bold. Remember, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but I am believing now more than ever for a movement of believers that tap into the compassion of Jesus Christ for humanity. And through that compassion, we can have the courage to pray for someone, to care for someone, to share with someone, to be bold, to live sent, and most importantly, to trust God for the outcome. Paul said it this way, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the increase. Church, I want to free your minds for a moment after. I know this is a bit of a heavy message, but I want you to hear that when you have compassion for someone, it's not always about feeling like we have to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with someone, have them get saved, baptized in water and the Holy Spirit, and filled and sent out on the mission field somewhere all in one day. Living sent means being ready to do whatever God asks you to do. Maybe it's simply building relationship with someone. Maybe it's just sharing a simple word of encouragement with someone. Maybe it's caring for somebody that felt all alone and didn't think that anyone noticed them. Maybe it means dropping a note off, an encouraging word to someone who's just been on your heart. Church, you don't know if you're in the process of planting a seed, if you're actually watering that seed, or maybe you will be the one that actually get to harvest what someone else planted or watered. But remember, church, God gives the increase. What he's asking of you is not to produce the result. What he's asking of you is to stay close to his heart, to allow his compassion to fill you, and to have the boldness to pray for someone, to care for someone, and to share with someone when the opportunity is there. And church, we are better together. And that's the beauty of this. Maybe one of you will speak to someone else will care for them, and together we will see that harvest come in. This church, I believe, is one of the greatest moments in history. The harvest is ready. It is there. The baton has been passed. The commission has been given. The time is now. Church, let's do this. Let's be bold, and let's live sent.
Thanks for listening to this message today. For more information about Impact Church, follow us on social media or check out our website at impactkingston.com.